Hi Booklovers, welcome back to my channel. This is going to be my wrap up for May. For last month I read over 40 books again, so it's another big reading month. Lots of audios, lots of shorter reads, so let's just jump into everything that I read back in May. My first read was Teacher by Fiona. This is book 6 in her Voyeur series, but each book in the series can be read totally fine as a standalone. I personally have only read 3 books and I read them completely out of order. So this one is the 6th and last book. It's got friends to lovers, it is fairly slow burn, and it's got an age gap. Our heroine Hannah has had a pretty traumatic past. She was sold into human trafficking along with her sister, and her sister unfortunately did not survive. But Hannah did, she survived, and she's out, and she's now dealing with that past trauma, and she's been having a hard time moving on sexually. The only person who makes Hannah comfortable when it comes to sex is our hero Daniel. He is the club owner of Voyeur, which is like the center of this whole series. They become really good friends. Daniel is so patient and kind and understanding when it comes to Hannah and her trauma. It is a really sweet romance, and of course it does have some kink because we do have a BDSM club. Hannah and Daniel were really great together. I mean, Hannah has been through so much and she definitely deserves happily ever after. It was a very solid read, so I gave it 4 stars. The whole series, or at least the 3 books that I read in the series, were all 4 stars, and I definitely need to continue with completing the rest of the series. Next I read Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert, which is the second Brown sister book. This one I gave 4 stars. It was great. I love Talia Hibbert and her writing, but I didn't love it quite as much as Chloe's book, as much as book 1. I don't have my copy with me right now. I lent it to my cousin. I am like her library basically. Here Danny and Zaf get into a fake relationship because they go a little bit viral after they're captured in a video where Zaf is rescuing Danny during a fire drill. They are good friends, they work at the same university, so Zaf asks Danny to continue with this fake dating thing, this whole fake relationship, because it's really good publicity for his charity organization. The only problem though is that Zaf has a huge crush on Danny, and Danny refuses to allow any kind of emotions or like love in her life. The chemistry between these two is insane. These two want each other desperately. There is a lot of longing. You wouldn't really be able to tell by this cute illustrated cover, but Talia Hibbert does write some very steamy romances. But this book was really great. I always have such a fun time reading Talia Hibbert. Her books are so charming, her characters are endearing, and now I need to read Eve's book. I then read Aisha at Last by Uzma Jalaluddin, which is a Muslim modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice. This one I gave 3 stars. I unfortunately did not love it as much as I wanted to. I'm always a big sucker for Jane Austen retellings, Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion specifically. And while this one is a fairly straightforward retelling, so if you've read Pride and Prejudice, you can probably guess what's gonna happen in this book. And I like the romance between Aisha and Colę. I just had a hard time and struggled a lot with the outside characters, the secondary characters, who were all just awful. All these secondary characters were so unlikable that it made it hard to fully enjoy the story. Like Khaled's mother, she is so controlling and so mean to Aisha. Aisha's younger cousin, who is arranged to be married to Khaled, our hero, she is a spoiled brat. Khaled's workplace, his boss, there is a ton of Islamophobia going on there. So there is a lot of stuff going on outside of the romance as well that it fell all over the place. I did still like Aisha and Khaled's characters. Aisha is your modern, non-traditional Muslim, whereas Colę is conservative and traditional, and the two do clash. But anytime the chapters would focus or would be a narrative of a secondary character, I would basically just tune out because I did not care. The author did just release another book, which is another retelling, but this time of the movie You've Got Mail, and it does sound good. I do want to read it, but we'll see how that goes. I then read 2 Christina books, 2 of their more recent releases. I finally read The Honey Don't List, which I have been pushing off because I've seen some not so good reviews for it, and yeah, it was not that great. I give it 3 stars. It was a very meh, okay book. This book is basically Christina Lauren's take on this whole HGTV home remodeling popular thing that's going on in romance right now. But our main characters are actually not like the home remodeling people. They're the assistants for this famous HGTV couple. Carrie and James are assistants to this married couple who, behind closed doors, are actually not in such a happy marriage. So Carrie and James's job is basically to maintain that couple's good public image while they're all on a book tour. The setup of this one is interesting. Christina Lauren does have some unique plots, but it was just not executed well enough for me, unfortunately. I felt no chemistry between Carrie and James. I really just didn't care about their characters. The couple that they worked for were at least a little bit interesting and added drama to the story, but Carrie and James just did not work for me. I also read their newest release, The Soulmate Equation, which came in this really pretty hardcover, but this one, sadly, was another 3-star read, just so very average, which is such a shame because I used to love Christina Lauren, but their latest releases have just not been working for me. This couple, I also felt zero chemistry. Jess and River were just really bland and boring. I loved Jess's daughter though. She's a single mother. Her daughter Juno is adorable. Jess's grandparents as well were really great characters. The side characters were my favorite part about this book. The whole setup of this book is another unique plot. We have a matchmaking company that is DNA based. It does verge a bit on eugenics, but they talk about it not being eugenics, but whatever. River actually works for this company, and it turns out after Jess gives her spit for them to dissect, they have a 98% match. This is the highest percentage this company has ever had, and they kind of make a deal. The company will offer Jess money that she does need in exchange for Jess and River pretending to try to make their match work. It is yet another low steam, almost closed door kind of romance, and sometimes I can't even believe that this author is the same author who wrote the Beautiful Bastard series. So The Soulmate Equation, sadly, another disappointing read. I haven't really been loving their recent releases, but apparently I'll still keep reading them. And then I read The Guy on the Right by Kate Stewart. This is a new adult college romance. I will never get tired of college romances. Here we have a friends to lovers romance with a hero who is the underdog. Theo is not his hot, sexy, athletic roommate. He is just our normal nice guy. He meets our heroine Lainey at a party and they get along really great, and now Theo wants his chance with her, but he does have a bit of competition with his roommate. Although it's not really like a true love triangle because it is fairly obvious who the heroine is gonna end up with. I gave this 3 stars, maybe 3.5. Like, it was good, but I did have some hesitations about it, and some things did make me a little bit uncomfortable while reading it. I think the author tried to make Lainey a little bit too quirky and cool, and it just did not work out that well for me. Theo, he's a nice guy, but I never really fully fell in love with his character either. But it is still a really easy read, good college vibes, but a lot of people seem to really love this one, and I do want to try book 2. That one is about that athletic roommate. It sounds like it's gonna be some sort of forbidden love or single parent thing, and that is just my catnip. I also read the new Abby Jimenez, Life's Too Short. This one I gave 4 stars to. It was good, not my favorite of her books, definitely not as good as last year's The Happily Ever After playlist, but I still really enjoyed it. The heroine, Vanessa, is a YouTuber. She chronicles her adventures, her travels, because she knows that she may or may not have ALS because it runs in her family. ALS is fatal, so she lives by the motto of living life to its fullest. But when she gets custody of her niece and her traveling and vlogs take a pause, she gets the help of her hot lawyer neighbor, Adrian. They have this really wonderful friends to lovers romance. There is a lot of great banter going on between them. They're always visiting each other, going over to each other's apartments, taking care of Vanessa's niece. They were really great and fun together, but Vanessa is the one who puts a hold and puts a pause on anything moving forward from that. Vanessa does not want Adrian to fall in love with a woman who may not live past 30, which is why they are strictly friends, even though they really want to bone each other. But if anyone is wondering, there is a happily ever after. It is a romance. You can't really have someone dying at the end. So if you love single parent romances and friends to lovers, slow burn, this book is perfect. I then read Sexy Nerd by Kaylee Loring. This is a brother's best friend romance. John, he was actually a huge nerd growing up and he had a crush on the heroine back then, but he has since grown up and glowed up. He's now this famous tech billionaire. John and Olivia reunite and Olivia doesn't even recognize him at first. He of course knew exactly who she was because he's always had a crush on her, which I love. There's also the fake dating trope because John needs a fake girlfriend for this event and business trip and he offers to pay Olivia to be his fake girlfriend. I gave this one 4 stars because it was just really quick, really lighthearted and flirty and fun. It's not a book to take too seriously, it's just very fluffy and fun, so I had a great time reading it. And then I read Due Diligence by Anna Szabo. This is book 3 in an MM series. I had no idea it was book 3. I thought it was book 1 for some reason. I didn't even bother to check on Goodreads, so that's my fault. It's book 3 in the Takeover series, but reads totally fine as a standalone. I give this one 3.5 to 4 stars. It's like very close to 4, but it wasn't quite there. It's a second chance romance, which is one of my favorite tropes. Fazil and Todd were high school sweethearts. They were secret high school sweethearts. They never came out with their relationship to the public. It's been about 15 years since they broke up and last seen each other, but they do reunite because of work. Fazil is hired to audit the company that Todd works at, so they're now in very close proximity. Their second chance romance is them trying to uncover exactly what went wrong with their relationship, why they broke up, which was basically a misunderstanding and a whole miscommunication thing. Their chemistry is great, they never stopped wanting each other, but Fazil was just way too much of a wishy-washy character for me. He was hot and cold, he had a ton of insecurities back then and now still. Honestly, I just really thought their breakup back in high school was so dumb. So while the story itself wasn't like perfect, I still did like the writing. It was my first time reading this author and I definitely want to read the rest of the series now. I also read Anchored Hearts by Priscilla Oliveris. If you couldn't tell, I've been reading a lot of yellow covered books that I made a video for, so if you haven't watched that one yet, go check it out. This one is another second chance romance. It's book 2 in the Keys to Love series, but reads fine as a standalone. This I gave 3 stars. It was not my favorite. Priscilla Oliveris' writing is a bit too cheesy for me, and also this book just did not focus enough on the second chance romance and the romance in general. Anna Maria and Alejandro were high school sweethearts, but Alejandro ended up leaving the country to pursue his career in photography. Anna Maria was devastated. She wanted to stay home in Florida with her family, but Alejandro left her. Now, after an accident, Alejandro is back home for a while and these two have some unfinished business to solve. I love a good second chance romance, but I was not feeling the chemistry here. I honestly would have been totally fine if Alejandro and Anna Maria stayed friends. I mean, at the beginning of the book, they're not on good terms, but they slowly try to forgive each other and grow to understand each other more. So they become friends, and that was honestly the most that I ever felt from them. So the romance was a bit of a letdown. I did love the whole setting of Key West. Like, it is such a perfect beach read. Their whole family, the community, the Cuban community is also really great to read as well. I just wish we got more romance from this one. Another yellow covered book that I read was Dal A for Aunties by Jessie Q. Sutanto. I gave this one 4.5 stars. It was so good, so much fun, ridiculous and over the top. It was just a great read. It is definitely more on the women's fiction side though than romance. There is some romance, there is a second chance romance, but it is not the focus of the book, but I find myself not minding that. I usually don't mind it if I know going in what I'm going to get, women's fiction or romance, and I knew this one wouldn't have like a romance focus, so it was fine. But here we have an Asian heroine. She comes from a Chinese Indonesian family. She lives with her mother and her 3 meddling aunts. Medi grew up where I grew up in Southern California, so that was a really nice nice thing to read. But the whole plot of this book, which is hilarious, is that Medi is set up on a blind date by her mother and she accidentally kills that blind date. Medi gets her mom and 3 aunts in getting rid of the body and trying to bury the body, but unfortunately they don't have time to because they have to work at a wedding that weekend. So they end up bringing that body with them to the wedding, to like this little island, and the whole day they are just trying to keep this body, this dead body, a secret. All the aunties are great. They are such a riot. They all have these distinct personalities. They are ridiculous and I love them. This is one of the most chaotic books that I've ever read, and it was mainly because of the aunties. And regarding the second chance romance, Medi reunites with her college sweetheart at that wedding. Nathan is the owner of the hotel where the wedding is supposed to take place. So their second chance romance was really sweet and adorable, but the aunties here definitely stole the show. I read 2 Jessa Kane novellas. She released 2 of them in May, which was amazing. The first one is Stepstalker, and the title basically says it all. The hero is the heroine's stepbrother. Well, they're new step siblings because while the hero was away on tour, he is a Navy SEAL. He comes back with a new gorgeous stepsister. This I gave 3 stars. It's not amazing or anything, but it hit the spot. Jessa Kane always delivers when it comes to smutty novellas. The other one is Making Their Vows, which I also gave 3 stars. Here we have one of her high school novellas. Well, one of them is in high school, but she's still 18, so it's fine. We have a good girl and a bad boy from the wrong side of the tracks who is also an underground fighter. Her novellas with the younger characters are not my favorite, but they're still cute. I mean, as cute as Jessa Kane can get, and I did like the whole underground fighting part. I then started on my little reverse harem binge. I have a video coming out soon, I hope. I just need to finish up my TBR, but the first one that I read was A Lady of Rooksgrave Manor. This is a monster reverse harem romance by Catherine Moon, and I loved it. It was exactly what I wanted and what I was looking for, so I gave it 4.5 stars. It's like a historical, paranormal, erotic type of read. We have our heroine Esther who works as a maid, but then she gets a job working at Rooksgrave Manor, basically as an escort. The escorts who work at this manor, they sleep with all sorts of monsters and all sorts of paranormal creatures. Esther gets 5 of these paranormal creatures. There's a vampire, a golem, a sphinx shifter, a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, where Mr. Hyde is the monster, and the last one is an invisible man, and she sleeps with all of them. The steam is insane. Esther is pretty much a nymphomaniac. There is some sword crossing, but only between 2 of the guys, but I really loved all of these characters. They all had their own distinct personalities. Booker, our golem, is probably everyone's favorite. He is a sweetheart. So if you're looking for a good monster romance, this one, you have to check it out. It's the first book in a series. The author announced that there will be more books in this world, so I am so excited. I don't think that we're gonna be following Esther again and we're getting another heroine and another harem, so that should be exciting. I read about some more monsters with Feed by Evita Weiss. It is a very short novella. It's only about 50 pages and it is very, very monstery. They have a very hot night together when the heroine schedules in some sex through this app. We've got a succubus heroine and her co-worker who she kind of hates. He is not your typical fae. They have very different and interesting physical traits that make the steam quite unique. The novella is pure monster sex. There is not much romance going on. They literally have just that one night together and the ending is very open-ended. Babe, are you okay? I gave it 4 stars, but I would love if this author gave like a full-length book a try. I read my one YA, my one young adult book of the year, if you can believe it. It was Winter Keep by Kristen Kishore, which is book 4 in her Graceling series, which is a childhood teenage fave of mine. I was obsessed with Graceling and Fire and Bitter Blue back in the day, so I decided to give book 4 a try. Even though, as you all know, I don't read young adult anymore. I gave Winter Keep 3 stars. I had a hard time getting into it, and I'm not sure if it was because it was just so long since I last read Bitter Blue, and it's been like a decade since I was last in this world. It continues with Bitter Blue's story, who is our young queen. She ends up being kidnapped and everyone is trying to find her. We also have another heroine who lives in this realm where there are talking foxes. It was interesting, but I just could not get a solid grasp on the characters and the story. Things are very slow and dragged out. We do at least get a little romance between Bitter Blue and Gideon, even though I completely forgot who Gideon even was. So sadly, this one just did not live up to my love for the first 3 books. I also read some sci-fi romances this month. I read one with a tentacle alien and one with a gladiator alien. The tentacle one was Mandy and the Tentacle Monster by B.B. Harper. I mean, the title says it all, right? I gave it 3 stars because while it was cute, there was still a lot of editing issues, which is really weird. If you're publishing a book, you definitely need to edit it. And also the pacing was not the best. Like, there was this part where the main characters are separated for literal months and it got so boring to read. But anyway, it is an alien romance. It's a fairly typical alien romance with a human heroine, alien hero. We have the issue of not being able to communicate, and our tentacle hero thinks that the heroine is like some sort of pet. So he keeps Mandy, he feeds her, takes care of her, all that good stuff. It was kind of hilarious how he thought of her as a pet, but once they do realize that she is an actual sentient being who can think for herself, that's when things start to progress. It was a cute, quick read, but again, like the pacing and the editing issues just took me away out of the story, so I couldn't really love it. The other sci-fi romance that I read is by Ruby Dixon. It is not Ice Planet Barbarians, because I stopped reading that series quite a while ago. The one that I read is Bad Guy, which is her new release. I was initially super intrigued by this one because it's a gladiator romance and I've never read one before. Unfortunately, we don't actually get that much of the gladiator part, like the fighting stuff, so that was a letdown. The hero, Carlton, our gladiator, is like this mix of these all sorts of different creatures, like his DNA has been spliced, but he is supposedly this famous and fierce gladiator, but he wakes up not having any memories. The scientists who have him captive are trying to get him back into gladiator shape, but he is refusing. He doesn't want to work with them, but then he sees a heroine who is human, and the scientists now have this thing to threaten him over. I gave this one 3.5 stars because again, I wanted an actual gladiator romance, but the hero, he's actually a really nice guy. He's not this like awful violent being, but I wanted the excitement and I wanted the fighting, and we didn't really get that. It is insta-lovey because it is Ruby Dixon. I mean, as soon as the hero sees the heroine, he's like, she's mine. I then read Sloth by Ella James. This is actually a reread. I did not remember that I read it before, but Goodreads says I did. But once I started listening to the audio again, things sort of came back to me. This book is basically a cancer romance book, but luckily there is a happily ever after at the end. I give it 3.5 stars. It could have been a 4, but it is just so freaking long. It's about 550 pages, and about a third of it, or maybe half of it, is just like focused on the cancer part. But besides that, it is a new adult college romance. We have a heroine who deals drugs for money. I read some reviews on Goodreads, and apparently a lot of people had problems with Chloe dealing drugs, well, dealing weed on campus. The hero is Kellen, who is like the class president, and he is a stickler for rules. So we have 2 very opposite kinds of people here. But again, it devolves into the whole cancer plot and gets really sad, so just a heads up, if you're trying to read this book, that's what it's all about. Also, for anyone who is like, that's a spoiler, I mean, yes, but also this book has been out for about 6 years now, so it's fine. I then read Devil in Disguise by Lisa Kleypas, which is book 7 in the Ravenel series, though honestly I'm not sure why they decided to include it in the Ravenels. I know Lisa Kleypas said somewhere that she did it because there were a lot of Ravenel characters in it, but there weren't. It was mainly focused on the two families from the Wallflower series. Devil in Disguise, no surprise, I give it 5 stars. I loved it so freaking much. It was just Lisa Kleypas perfection. It was everything I wanted and more from her historical romances. Merritt, our heroine, is Marcus and Lillian's daughter. Marcus and Lillian were in What Happened One Autumn, book 2 in the Wallflower series. She is their oldest daughter and she is a widow. She's now currently running her late husband's shipping company, and the latest person that she's working with is Keir, our hero. He is our very first Scottish Lisa Kleypas hero, and he is utter perfection. His character, the way that he adores Merritt, his lovemaking, like chef's kiss. Unfortunately for Keir, someone is out trying to kill him, and all the while he is trying to woo Merritt because he knows she is the only one for him. This book is also wonderful because we get so much of Marcus and Lillian and Evie and Sebastian. This book is basically combining the Marstons with the Shallons, and it was just so nice. I was so happy being back with the Wallflower families. Also, yes, Keir is somehow related to Sebastian. I don't want to say exactly how, but it's pretty obvious and you can make a pretty educated guess about it. A lot of people are not going to be happy about this relation, but I really had no problem with it. I was just so happy and in love with Merritt and Keir. And we do get quite a few chapters in Sebastian's point of view, so this book was just perfect. I then binged on all 6 books in the Player series by Nana Malone. I basically gave almost every book in the series 3 stars. It's a fairly average series for me. They're all short and quick, fairly fun sports romances, very trope-tastic. Book 1 is Bryce. Bryce is the first of the Coulter family to get his book. Bryce is a tennis pro who unfortunately loses it all because of an accident. He's trying to get back into training, and that's when he meets the heroine Tammy, who is also an aspiring tennis player, but she doesn't have the wealth that Bryce does. Bryce pursues her, Tammy tries to resist, and all the while they are practicing tennis. Book 2 is Dax. He is the bad boy of the family and he falls for his best friend's little sister. We have football instead of tennis this time. It's a fairly typical romance with a playboy hero who has to prove that he's all in with the heroine, so another okay read. For Echo, book 3, we have the one and only sister of the family. She is expected to enter into the Olympics as a runner, but she doesn't want to. Her grandfather has hired her a running coach, our hero Cole, who thinks she's nothing but a spoiled brat. I liked Echo's character, but Cole and his attitude towards her and her family, towards like wealthy people in general, I guess. It was just really annoying to read. Fox, book 4 is our hockey romance. I actually like this one the most of the series. I gave it 4 stars, mainly because it's got the friends to lovers trope and the roommates trope. Fox's best friend Sasha needs a roommate, and that's when he steps in. And since they're living in very close proximity together, they are starting to realize how attractive the other person is, and they can't stop wanting each other. Book 5 is Ransom, and it's another hockey romance. Ransom, our hero, he has been burned by love in the past, with his wife walking out on him. Now he's very anti-relationships and anti-commitment, but then he reunites with the girl that he had a crush on back in high school, the girl that he fantasized about back then, and now he wants a chance with her. The last book in the series is Gage. Gage is our youngest sibling. He's also a basketball player, and it's a college sports romance. He ends up falling for his tutor, the heroine, who wants nothing to do with him. It's a sweet college romance, but like the rest of the series, nothing that really wowed or amazed me, so another 3 stars. My next read was The Legacy by Dylan Allen. This is the first book in the Rivers Wild trilogy. It's a billionaire romance. The hero, Hayes, is this heir to an oil empire. Hayes and Confidence do not get off to a good start. Hayes practically thinks Confidence is a gold digger. Thankfully, Confidence puts him in his place and definitely makes him work for it and work for her forgiveness. There is a slight enemies to lovers vibe, but they don't really truly hate each other. There's just a lot of banter, a lot of whips back and forth. These two are also from completely different worlds, so it was really interesting and really hot to see them get together, but sadly I just didn't fall in love with either of their characters. I gave this one 3 stars. There's also a lot going on with family drama, a ton of secrets. There's like a reason why the series is called Rivers Wild and the hero's last name is Rivers. It was just a bit too too much, which is why I couldn't really fully love this one. I then tried Katie McGarry's very first fantasy romance, A Wicked and Beautiful Garden. This is the first book in her new series and I gave it 3 stars. I sadly did not love it. I had some high hopes because I loved her YAs back in the day, like Pushing the Limits. Still one of my favorite young adult contemporaries of all time, but A Wicked and Beautiful Garden is adult. It's got a second chance romance, it's got fae, so kind of sort of both fantasy and paranormal. The heroine, Cassie, fell in love with Orion, who is a fae, about 10 years ago, but then he broke her heart and left her. They reunite when Orion shows up back in her town looking for this baby who is supposedly going to be the future queen of the fae. And now Cassie, who also has some supernatural powers, she gets roped into searching for this baby with Orion. There's quite a bit of action when it comes to like the fae and witches and demons all fighting each other. This one was interesting. It didn't have a really good grasp on this fantasy world, so there's still a lot of things to be left explored. The romance was okay, but definitely not like a focus of the story, and Orion is still not well developed enough for me. It pretty much just tells us it's a second chance romance, but I never really felt that love between them even back then. But even though I didn't love this book, it does still have a lot of potential. I'm definitely going to be continuing on with the series, and hopefully there's going to be a little bit better world building and better romance. I also read another Lisa Kleypas book, but this time one of her contemporaries. I gave Christmas Eve at Friday Harbor 3 stars, but it was mainly because it was so short. It's like a 200-page Christmas romance novella. Our hero Mark has just been given custody of his orphaned 6-year-old niece, so he moves back home with his family to the small town. Maggie is a toy shop owner in this small town, and she seems to be the only one who's been able to get Holly, the niece, out of her quiet shell. She's also a widow, so she doesn't want to fall in love again, but Mark and Holly are too adorable. This one is literally like a Hallmark Christmas romance movie, and it actually became a movie, I think. So I looked it up, and it turns out Hallmark did actually turn this book into a movie called Christmas with Holly. It came out in 2012, so quite a while ago, and maybe I'll try to watch it. We'll see. I then read a Beauty and the Beast retelling called Bitterburn by Anne Aguirre. This is a fantasy romance retelling. It's got some good gothic vibes, fairly straightforward with a beast hero, a heroine who is sent out basically as a tribute for the beast. So I like this one. I gave it 4 stars. It turns out the beast is not quite so beastly. He is definitely a grump and keeps away from Amara, the heroine. So the beast's name is Njal, I think that's how you say his name, but he kind of reminded me of like a White Walker from Game of Thrones, the way that he was described, like this blue, icy cold being. So that was interesting and unique, and I also like that he was pretty much a sweetheart. All he wants to do is break free from this curse, and it seems like Amara is the only one capable of doing so. The ending with the bad guys, I will say, felt a bit anticlimactic, like it was over fairly quickly and easily, but still I had a fun time reading this one. Even though I do love Beauty and the Beast retellings, it's pretty hard to find some good ones, and this one, it was pretty good. Next, I read Hate Crush by Angelina M. Lopez. This is book 2 in her Filthy Rich series, and I loved it. I loved it just as much as book 1. I gave it 5 stars. This is a second chance romance with a rock star, with a princess heroine, so much angst, quite a bit of groveling, so you can see why I love this one. Aish, our hero, broke Sophia's heart 10 years ago when he chose his career, his rock star career, over Sophia. He chose to throw her away instead of, I don't know, taking her along with him. Now, even 10 years later, Sophia has some intense hate for Aish, so if you love lovers to enemies to lovers, this book is perfect. There's also the fake dating trope. There's lots of good tropes here, but they have to fake date, pretend to be back on good terms while they reunite at Sophia's vineyard. And during this reunion, Aish is pretty much trying to win back the one and only love of his life. He knew that Sophia was the best thing that ever happened to him. The biggest mistake of his life was breaking up with her, and all this angst when it came to his character and all the groveling that he needed to do for Sophia, it was all so good for me and I loved it. And I mean, yes, Aish, His reasoning for breaking up with Sophia was so dumb. I pretty much just loved how much the hero hated himself for hurting the heroine. I did a reread of Then Came You by Lacey Kleypas for the Historical Hellions book club. The first time I read this book I gave it 3.5 stars, but the second time I gave it 4 stars. I will still say though, this is probably one of my least favorite couples from Lacey Kleypas, just because I didn't really vibe with Alex all that much the first time, but he did get better during my second read. So here we have an enemies to lovers historical romance between two opposites. We have a straight-laced, stick-up-his-ass Alex and a wild and reckless heroine in Lily. Alex is planning on marrying Lily's younger sister, but Lily is determined to stop this marriage because she doesn't want her younger sister to end up in a loveless marriage. Lily is a shocker. She does outrageous things, but people love her for it. She is very headstrong and is willing to do anything to stop Alex from marrying her sister. Alex is kind of a jerk. He has preconceived notions of what a woman should be, and that is the opposite of Lily, but still he can't keep her out of his mind, and he actually ends up being the one to fall in love first. They both do some pretty outrageous and hilarious things to each other to one-up each other, and honestly the main reason why I bumped this up from 3.5 to 4 stars was because of Lily. Lily is just so great. I loved her character. She's so strong and independent. She does what she wants and nothing can stop her. This is book 1 in the Gamblers of Craven series, and it's the book where Derek Craven is introduced, and if you have not read Derek's book, Dreaming of Hugh, you need to get on that. My next read was City of Sin by Ivy Smoke, and this one was bad. I gave it 1 star. I did not like this one, mainly because the hero was just so gross. Mason is a playboy jerk who does not give a shit about anything but himself. He uses and walks all over women and definitely does the same to our heroine B. They're set up on a blind date together by their friends and it does not go well, but of course the heroine is so easily in lust with the hero that she lets him do anything sexual to her. I really just hate these stories where the heroine is so susceptible to the hero's looks, where he'll treat her like shit but she'll still sleep with him. Also, there's a part that had me dying where the hero says that women literally drop their panties when they hear that he owns a condo at the Trump International Hotel. I was like, did I hear that correctly? That was just so funny to me, and basically like that's the kind of hero that he is. So yeah, this one was just bad. I then read 2 Anna Huang books. I finished up the last 2 books in the If Love series. Book 3 is called If Love Had a Price, and this one is the one where the heroine offers the hero $15,000 to sleep with her father's fiance. Chris, the heroine, comes from a very wealthy family and she knows that her father's fiance is nothing but a gold digger, so she wants to break them up and she ends up finding our actor hero to do so. If you love the whole opposite sides of the tracks kind of romance with a poor boy, rich girl kind of romance, this one is great. I gave it 4 stars. Chris is a bit of a spoiled brat, but she does become more endearing throughout the book. Nate is the perfect match for her because he does not let her walk all over him. He has his own family issues, which is why he needs that money desperately, but then of course they do end up starting to fall genuinely in love with each other. There's lots of good chemistry, lots of good banter. There's also a bit of the fake dating trope where Nate is pretending to date Chris so that he can get close to the fiance, the dad's fiance. I just really like these 2 characters and it was a great solid read. Book 4 and the last book in the series is If We Were Perfect, and this one it rounds out the final couple in this friendship group. It's a second chance romance between Olivia and Sammy, who have been teased throughout the series. They got together back in book 1, but then they broke apart by the end, I believe, and they have avoided each other since then. But now they have no choice but to be around each other physically a lot because Olivia's house gets flooded. The last person that she should turn to is her ex, but Sammy does offer to help her and offers her a room to stay at his place. So lots of good chemistry and tension going on between these exes turned roommates. Also, if you love foodie romances, Sammy is a baker. He owns a successful bakery. They feed each other all the time when they move in and it's super cute. I really enjoyed the second chance romance. I love the angst, the tension. I had been dying to find out what exactly went wrong strong between these two. It was a really great conclusion to the series as well. We get really good cameos from the first two couples. So if you're looking for a really great, diverse, contemporary romance series, definitely check out the If Love series. Next, I read my very first Lorraine Heath book, Scoundrel of My Heart. This is book 1 in her Once Upon a Dukedom series, which apparently is a spin-off of her previous series that I had not read yet, but it reads totally fine if you haven't read that previous series. I gave this one 4 stars. I had so much fun reading it. I loved the longing and the passion here. We have a heroine, Catherine, who needs to marry someone who is titled in order to inherit her grandmother's cottage. The hero, Griffith, is unfortunately a second son and not titled. He is her best friend's brother, and she actually asks him to help her woo this duke. She wants to get this duke to marry her so she can get her cottage, but she ends up falling for Griffith instead. There's a lot going on with Griffith and his family. In the previous series, his family was ruined and stripped of all his titles. Griff has now come back to society, and he's this owner of an infamous club. They still want each other, they still can't have each other, and the tension was just so good. I am now dying to read more Lorraine Heath. So many people have been telling me how great she is. I'm especially excited for book 2 in the series because it's about that duke that Catherine wanted to marry. I also finally read another new to me author that so many people love, Lucy Parker. I read Act Like It. This was a wonderful Grumpy Sunshine kind of romance. I gave it 4 stars. It takes place in London in a theater, and our two main characters are actors. Richard, the hero, used to be one of the hottest actors out there, but now he has kind of been ruining his reputation because of his temper. His PR has been a nightmare, and that's when Lainey comes in. Lainey and Richard are forced into a fake relationship in order to repair Richard's bad image. Richard is a jerk and a total snob, and Lainey calls him out on it. There was so much great chemistry between these two, so much great banter. I love the way that Richard's walls were just slowly crumbling because of Lainey and her sunshine. I can totally see why so many people love this book and love this author now. It was Grumpy Sunshine Heaven. I do actually own the rest of the series in paperback, and I'm so excited to read more. I read another fantasy romance. May was like the month of fantasy romance for me, so I read Lord of the Fading Lands by C.L. Wilson. This is the first book in her Terran Soul series. For some reason, I thought the books in the series were all kind of standalones, like each book would be about a different couple, but nope, it's all about this one couple. And there are 5 books, so I have quite a way to go still, but I really like this first book. I gave it 4 stars. It's like a good first installment with some good world building, a lot of teasing with the romance, which is still not solid yet, which is fine because there's 5 books, but this one has a very interesting fantasy world where it's got fae, but the fae in this world are like these magical beings who can control the 5 elements, the 5 natural elements. Rain, our hero, is the fae king, but he's also known as something called a Terran soul, where he's fae, but he's also able to shift into a Terran, which is like a flying cat, a flying big cat. The Terran and the fae, their 2 races are like intertwined, and unfortunately the Terran are dying, which means the fae are also going to die, especially when there's no Terran soul heir. But then of course Rain ends up finding his true mate, his fated mate, in this human named Ellie. But it turns out Ellie is not just a human. She has some of her own hidden powers that she never realized. So these two have a very slow courtship because she's just this young 20-something and he's this thousands-year-old guy and a literal king of his people. So Rain is trying to slowly woo Ellie into becoming his mate and being the queen of his people. I love this world. I thought it was fascinating. The world building was great. It wasn't like too info dumpy. I like the secondary characters as well, with Rain's like backup 5 men. Also, Rain is just so alpha and protective and possessive. I love it. So it was a really great start to the series, and I'm definitely going to be reading some more, especially because a lot of people also told me the story gets even better with each book. I then read Filthy by Serena Akeroyd, which is book 1 in this Mafia romance series. I read this for my romance book club, Ravished by Romance. Our live show for this book discussing it is on Jessica's channel, so you can go check it out. But I gave this one 3 stars because it was so unnecessarily long. We have a heroine who owns this bakery, and the hero, he is part of the mafia and he wants that building where the bakery is. So they meet when Finn is trying to get Aoife to sell the building, sell her place, and immediately May, he wants her. The first time they sleep together, it's pretty much over for him and he wants her for himself. The romance is a very quick pace and there are a ton of sex scenes, like a bit too many that it got gratuitous. The mafia part was interesting. It's like a good intro to this mafia world and this mafia family. There were a lot of characters though, and each brother does get his own book. I'm more excited for the later books though, because people enjoyed it a lot more than this one. I then read Tristic's Venom by Penelope Douglas, which is her FF noodle romance, her high school bully romance. Penelope Douglas is literally like the only one who could make me want to read a high school romance and a high school bully romance at that. This book I gave 4 stars. It was not perfect, but I still had a great time reading it. It's enemies to lovers between a popular good girl and a poor girl from the wrong side of the tracks. Clay, our good girl, is not so good because she's actually a bully. She's been making Olivia's life hell all throughout high school, mainly because of all these unresolved feelings that she has for Olivia that she doesn't want to deal with. Liv is out, Clay is not. Liv is just basically trying to finish out the rest of senior year in order to go to her college and leave the state. But Clay, of course, does not make it easy for Liv. It is so angsty and brutal. The hate and hurt and anger here is so real. I did struggle in the beginning with this because I was just hurting for these two. There are a ton of awful things going on between both of their families. Clay's family is broken after the death of her younger brother. Liv's parents died and she and her brothers are just trying to make meets end. It was an addicting read though. I could not put this book down. It gets really exciting and intense. The chemistry is on fire. If you loved Bully or Punk 57, Tristic's Venom would definitely fit in with those two books' vibes. Next I read Love Scammed by Rilzy Adams. This is a Valentine's Day novella. Monet and Hudson were both set up on this blind date together on this all expenses paid vacation. They had no idea about this blind date, but they do go along with it anyway because it is all expenses paid, and it's a cruise to Turks and Caicos. I gave this one 4 stars. It was the perfect beach read. It was so unbelievably romantic. Like Hudson, he goes all out when it comes to wooing Monet. Hudson makes this Monet's best Valentine's Day ever. The romance is so dreamy, very low drama, very low angst, so it's perfect if you want something light and quick. And the final book that I read back in May was Wicked in His Arms by Stacy Reid. This is book 2, the second standalone in the Wedded by Scandal series. This one actually has similar vibes to Then Came You, with the enemies to lovers, hate to love. We have a hero who is very rigid. He's very straight-laced, whereas the heroine is independent and free. Tobias and Olivia enter a marriage of convenience, and that's when things start to get a little better because their first meeting was not great. He is super hot and cold with Olivia, but thankfully she doesn't just take it. Olivia definitely gives as good as she gets from Tobias, and since it is a Stacy Reid book, the chemistry and tension here is fantastic. I always love her steamy historical romances. There's a lot of angst, especially when it comes to her heroes. There's also good drama too. Like, I was hooked, especially at the end where Tobias messes up and has to do a little bit of groveling. Also, if you like a hero who's an author, who's a writer, Tobias is one. It was a great emotional read, and Stacy Reid really just never disappoints. Those were all the books that I read back in May. Let me know your thoughts if you read any of these. I know it's another long wrap up, another long video, so thank you for sticking around till the end. As always, links to the books will be down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!